Hey, how's it going? This is Hellbent and welcome to tutorial 5 for the AutoHotkey GUI tutorial series. In this one we're going to be looking at the checkbox and all the things that we can do with it. So I'm going to try to keep this tutorial as quick as possible, so I'm just going to jump right into it. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go over, I guess before I do that, have a quick look at everything that I have on the screen right here. If you see anything within this that you're confused about or don't know about and you'd like to learn more about it, I've covered all of the stuff that's on the page so far in previous tutorials. So if you feel a little bit lost, you might be recommended to go back and watch some of the earlier tutorials in this series. But I do generally try to make these tutorials as standalone as possible. Certain things that I've covered in previous tutorial, I'll just gloss over them. I won't go as in depth to keep things, the time shorter. But generally speaking, I do try to make it a standalone tutorial. So if you're only coming to watch this one tutorial, you shouldn't be too lost with anything that I do. Okay, so the control that we're working with today is the checkbox. So I already have everything set up here, so I'm just going to go over how you add it in. It's just like adding in all of our other controls where we just type in GUI, comma, add, and then the control type that we want. In this case, it's the checkbox. Now, with many other things in AutoHotkey, most things aren't case sensitive. I just like to add the uppercase character at the beginning, just out of habit, and it makes it easier to read it and blah blah blah. It all has to do about my preferences, so you don't have to actually do the G in GUI as an uppercase. You can do it in lowercase. I just like the way it looks. It pops out more to me, so that's why I do that. Okay, so we have our control. Then after our control's name, what we do is put in a comma, and anything that follows this one comma is our options. And there's tons of different options that we can use, and I'm going to go over most of them throughout this tutorial. And then after our options, we'll have the text that we want to have beside our checkbox. So we don't need that right now, so I'm just going to go ahead and run it, and you will see. Okay, so here we go. We have a checkbox, we can check it, and we can uncheck it. Easy stuff, right? Okay, next is positioning. So this is one of the things that I have covered in a lot more detail in earlier tutorials, so I'm not going to go too deep into this. I'll give a couple of quick examples. So what we want to do is we want to be able to position our GUI. Here, let me do something so that way we can have our GUI up while I work on this. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to type in GUI, comma, plus, always on top. And this way I can keep it always on the screen while we're working on it. Okay. So what we're going to want to do is position our checkboxes in wherever we need them in our GUI. Now our GUI can be any size we want, obviously within the size of our screen. We have to keep that in mind, but other than that, we can have it any size that we want. So let's start off with the basic. I'm going to just pick X50. So X, if you don't know, is our horizontal line. So we start at 0 on this side, and then we build as we go towards the right. And our y-axis is our vertical axis, and unlike in mathematics, it starts at 0 up at the top here and gets higher as we go down. Okay, so we have a position, and we will just check out what we've done. So right now we have it up here in the top corner, and now we should have it in a different position. Okay, there we go. So we've positioned it in a new place. So I usually with these tutorials I come up with let me see if I can drag it over. I come up with a lesson plan. I spend a couple hours working on a lesson plan of all the things that I want to cover. So if I get stuck on anything, I'll usually refer to that. And my mouse has been acting up lately, so I'm having a little difficulty with it. Okay, so if you see me pause for a minute, I'm looking over at my sheet so that way I keep on track. So I have positioning it, I did that. Now positioning multiple checkboxes. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to quickly add in another checkbox. Now I could do it, this applies for any other control that I'd add in as well, but I'll keep it all with the checkbox for now. I tend to try to keep things I try to keep as little information on the screen as possible, because I don't want your eye to get caught up in looking at things that aren't important. So I try to keep things as minimalistic as possible, so it makes it easier for you. Okay, so if I was to run this now, what it's going to do is it's going to take the next position that's available underneath where our current position is and place our next control there. So we have our X at 50, so our next one should be at 50 for the X-axis, but it's going to drop down to the next open position in the Y-axis, which is probably going to be about Y60 to Y65, somewhere around there. But we're not actually going to type it in, we're just going to see where it falls. And there we go. So it's dropped into the next open position. And if we had changed this to actually a larger number, it'll actually, when it drops this one in, it'll still follow that same X that we have up there. And I don't know, in about 4 or 5 tutorials down the road, I am going to go, there is some things that I haven't covered with positioning that I'll go into more detailed on its own tutorial later on. So for the most part, the stuff that I'm going to cover here will get you going, and you'll be well suited. Okay, so next let's talk about relative positioning. So what I can do is I can kind of guess where the next. So let's say I didn't want this checkbox underneath it. Let's say I actually wanted it beside it. What I can do is I can kind of guess what the X value would be with all the text that would go along with this one here. So I'm going to add in some text. Actually, no, it's not time for that yet. But I can kind of guess, and I can play around with the value of this one. Like I can say, okay, is it going to be X 170? And then I can run it and see what happens, and so on and so forth. But what I can also do is, instead of playing around with it like that, what I can do is just add to the previous X, or the end X value. So it's automatically going to calculate where this checkbox is going to end. So let's say with all its writing and everything, it's, even though it started at 150, it's going to end at 170. So with this, what we're going to do is we're going to actually apply an X value on top of its ending, not its beginning. Okay, so I'm just going to add 10 to its where it ended. So let's say I have my control and it ends right here. We're going to add 10 more pixels in the X along the X-axis, and our next one should end up somewhere, I don't know, somewhere around there. Actually, I don't know where it's going to be because I haven't tried it. I did that wrong. Okay, there we go. And I think I messed up. Okay, there we go. So as you can see, we didn't actually have to add a specific X value. All we did was we add it to the end position of our control. So it calculated where the control ends, and then we add it 10 to that. Likewise, we could do, 30. And so on and so forth. We can also do it with the Y-axis, but the Y-axis is a lot easier to work with. It's easier just to, for the most part, let it do its thing and don't touch the Y-axis unless you have to. And there's going to be a lot of cases where you do have to play around with the Y-axis, but for the most part, if you just let it drop and do its own thing, it works out fine. It's usually just the X-axis that you have to play around with. So that's relative positioning. So let me see. I have talked about adding multiple controls without. Okay, I did that. So I showed you how if I don't add anything here, it's just going to drop down to the next one. And if I continue that same line of thought, or that same practice, where I add in multiple controls, just like how when I ran it the last time when it was like this, it put it underneath. Each time I add a new one, it's going to do the same thing. So there we go. Right? And we can also do what we did before, X plus 10, X plus 10, and then we might be getting off the page soon, so I might have to I'm going to back this one up to 100 just so I don't run out of room. Alright. Okay, so I think you should be fine with this for the positioning of the controls on your GUI. And like I said, in the very first tutorial for this series, I went over this a lot more detailed. So we're just going to move on. Next we have text, font, color, and position. No, I did position. Why am I doing position again? Positioning. Oh, okay, positioning the text. It's not positioning, it's positioning the text. Alright, so I'm going to get rid of these guys here, and we're going to run it again. So, because the default text color is black, first thing I'm going to have to do is I'm going to have to change the color of the text. There's two ways we can go about doing this. The first way is I can go GUI, comma, font, comma, and then C for color. There's a whole bunch of different options that I can use in here, but for the moment we're just going to look at the color. So I do C for color, and then there's like 15 or 16 colors that I can use by the word. So for example, red, black, white, silver, blue, and so on and so forth. Everything else we're going to need to have a code. And if you look up online, if you look up, one of the things that I use is I just Google out HTML color codes, and then you'll have like a color picker that you can pick a color, and it'll give you a 6-digit number, number and letters, hex code, and you can just paste it in beside the letter C. I don't have one currently available. Let me see. Maybe I have one over here in a previous one. Red. Okay, I don't want to dwell on it, but yeah, like I said, just look up color codes and you'll get like a 6-digit code. You can also do something like I think this would work as well. This is the RGB, RGB color code. So you have the first 2 digits represent red, the second 2 are blue, and the last 2 are green. If I'm correct. So I think this is white. This should be white, but let's make sure. So I put some text for it to actually read. Okay, yeah. So this is white, and you can play around with different values. So I don't usually use this system, so I don't have them memorized. But there you go. All right. So like I said, you can use code. The other way we can change the color is directly inside of the control, and this, by doing it this way, I'm kind of two minds about doing it this way rather than doing the font. It all depends on how big your how many controls you have in your GUI. Because what I've found from working with these is by positioning your options in the same place every time you write your GUI, you're able to identify the different things. So let's say, for example, this control, I've added in its color into the control, but then the next one it's not in it. So in that case, I'll have this blank space there with my X and Y location here. And the X and Y location, when you're trying to get all the pieces just right, the way you want them to look and everything, you're going to be playing around with the values. So what I suggest is, if you are going to use the color, like, the options don't have to be in a specific order. You can put them in pretty much any order. As far as I can tell, I've never had a problem with the order of placing things. So I'm pretty sure that if I put the Y before the X, I wouldn't have any problems. Likewise, if I put the color after those, I don't think I would have any problems. I mean, we can test right now. But I would recommend on the left hand side, reserve this for your X and Y locations. It'll make editing it as you're building it up a lot easier. Likewise with your variables and your labels to the right hand side, but we'll cover that in a minute. Okay, so we've seen how to change the color. So we just do C plus the color. Most colors, we like I said, there's only about 16 or so colors that you can use by the actual name of the color. Everything else you're going to need to have the code for it. Let me see what else. Okay, so we have changing the color. I've added the text. So like I said before, after the first comma, this is our options, and then after that it's going to be the text that we display. We don't have to actually type anything in here. What we can actually use is variables in here. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to create a temp variable, and I'm going to actually call it temp just to be original. And then up somewhere else I'm going to say that temp equals the text. Alright, so now when we run it, instead of us placing our text here, we're just putting a variable, and then whatever's assigned to that variable is going to get displayed there. Alright, and so we end up with the same thing. I guess I should change that so that way you don't think I'm cheating or something. Here, let me, the new text. Okay, let me see. Next, what do we have? Adding text, positioning your text. Okay, so let's say that I'm not really happy. I'm going to go back to the other way of doing the text because it's easier for you to see it if I do it this way. Okay, so I have the text that I'm going to have displayed. Now let's say I'm not happy with it being butted up like this. Let's say I actually want the text to be on the opposite side of the control. What I can do is in the options, I can type in the word right, and now the text is on the opposite side. What I can also do is, if I don't like the spacing, let's say I want to add a little bit of space in between the control and the text, what I can do is I can't just simply, here, let me reload this because I changed something. I can't simply just add space because this isn't going to do anything. Alright, so you see I've added a mile of space, but when I actually go and run it, it hasn't added any space at all. So let's say I do want to add some space. All I need to do is add in the escape character, which is the button above tab, right? And then I can add whatever amount of space that I add, it will register now. Okay, so that's one way we can do it. We can also add in lines. So let's say I have a large amount of text and I want it to be spread out on multiple lines. One of the good things about this is that as you add more lines, it centers the checkbox with the text. So let's say the text is equal in size to the checkbox, and I have three rows of text. It'll have one above it. The second row will be even with it. The third one will be below it. And the way we add in that is we just do that escape character with an N, and then unless we want space, we don't add any space. Because if we add a space now, it is going to add a space to our text, which is going to make it look weird. So just keep that in mind. Okay, and I'll do one more line. So again, it's the escape character N, new line feed, and usually it takes me about 2 times of filming these tutorials to get it to where I'm happy. So this is the first time I'm recording. So if you actually end up seeing this version, then wow. Usually it takes me 2 times to do it. Okay, so there we go. Like I said, it'll make it so that way the text is lined up with our control. And once again, we can add in some space. And it's just going to affect the first one. We can do the same for the next line. Here, let me so I'll add 10 spaces. Okay, What we can also do is we don't actually have to have any text here. What we can do if we want to, like there could be reasons why you want to have it make it look really nice or whatever. What we can actually do is we can just use another control, the text control. And we'll do x plus 10. And I forgot to add color to it. Right, so we don't actually have to use the text option within our checkbox. We can create something else. So we can use some other kind of design around our text here. It's this is just about your design, like how you want it to look. Right, so there is nothing that says that you have to use this as your text. It's the checkbox that's the actual control. The text is just instructions, so you can actually use a text control to do your instructions with. And this will give you the ability to put it underneath instead. So let's do no X position and let's see what we get. Right, and I can do, so we have X100. If I do something like X90, right, so I can get this centered underneath it, or I can put it above it. So using a text control, I can have a little bit more flexibility on how the text shows up. Okay, so that's adding text, and I did positioning your text, escape characters. Yes, I did. Okay, next we have assigning our checkbox to a variable. Now, in order for us to actually be able to tell what the state of our checkbox is, we need a variable that state is going to get logged into. Also, with controls, when we assign them a variable, it also is kind of like an ID for that control. So we can use other things like GUI control and a bunch of other things like that. And it's our way. It's the AutoHotkey's way of knowing what control we're talking about or what control we're trying to do something with. So we're just going to create a variable, and I'm just going to call this, I had it something written down, checkbox1 was it? Let me see. I can't see it, but if I think it was checkbox1. Something simple. So I've assigned a variable or associated a variable with our control. I've called it check, and I know that it would have been box. Checkbox1, and we're going to add in the text. Okay, let me see. The text. Okay, so when I had first written this, what I had done is I created a hotkey that we're going to use to actually be able to display certain values. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create just a message box. And in that message box, we're going to output the value of our checkbox1. Okay, so I've saved it and I'm going to run it. Now, even though we've associated our control with the variable checkbox1, and we can clearly see that the checkbox isn't checked, because we haven't actually updated any values, when I press the hotkey that's going to output that value, it's not going to have anything stored in it. In fact, if I go and to make it more clear, what I'll do is I'll actually assign it something that it'll never have in normal operation. Now, if you're familiar with the previous ones, our states are going to be, it's going to have a value of 1 if it's checked and a value of 0 if it's not checked. And this allows us to use conditionals and all that stuff to be able to execute different pathways for our program to go depending on the value. So, but like I said, just by adding it into the GUI, we haven't actually assigned the value that's associated with this control. And what I'm doing now is just demonstrating that. So I've assigned the value of no value to it. So when I run it again and I hit number pad 2, we should get a message box that says no value. And there we go. So if we actually want it to update the value when we press on it, there's two ways we can do this. Okay, so let's say when I run the GUI for the first time, I want it to have the default, or like the kind of value that you would expect. So if it's not checked to begin with, you would expect it to have a value of 0. So the way we can do this is just before our return, what we can do is add in GUI, comma, submit, and then comma and no hide. And the no hide is just because if we did it without the no hide, as soon as it comes to that GUI submit, our GUI will get hidden. So we're saying don't hide it when you submit. So now, as soon as I run the program, because it's going to encounter this line before it hits the first return, it's going to update the value that we should expect to have in this, which is a 0 state for being unchecked. Okay, now if I hit that, the hotkey I've set up, we should get a value of 0. And we do. We get a value of 0. If I click on it, actually that's not going to do anything. If I click on it, it's still going to have a value of 0 because we only submitted it when we first ran it. Now what we want to do is, let me make sure I'm not stepping on my toes. Check. Okay. Now what we want to do is, I just wanted to make sure I wasn't stepping on my toes for something I'm covering later. Now what we want to do is have it so that way it updates every single time we click it. So right now it was at 0 when it started, but if I click on it, it's not going to do anything. It's not going to update the value. The value's permanently stuck at 0. In order for us to fix that, what we're going to do is we're going to attach a label to this as well. So the way we do our label is we just type G for go to label, or go to subroutine, go to sub, and then we need the name of a label. Usually you want to make something that makes sense. If you have multiple, if all you really want this label to really do is just submit, what you can do is you can use the same label for multiple controls. So if I have 10 checkboxes and all I really want it to do, all I'm really trying to do is just get it to update the value between 1 and 0. And then if I have for example, edit boxes, and all I really want them to do is just update their values, and for etc., etc., I can use the same label for all my controls. So I have one label, all my controls, and usually I'll use something that's like this: submit all. So there's my label's name. Now I just need to create it. And all I'm going to do is have it submit, do that, oh, I need that GUI. GUI and then I'll return. Okay, let me see what I have. And I can I'll add in a couple extra controls just to make this extra clear. So I'm going to take the variable and I'm just going to change it. Okay, so now when we check, because of, I guess I'll add this into all of them as well. So any one that I want, I can add it in. I'm going to add in the label, or the call to that label. Okay, that should be good. So now anytime we click on any of them, it'll update the value for all of them. So as soon as I clicked on it, it changes it, changes it, changes it, and each time we click on it, it'll change its value. So now if I do that same, our notepad, we can see that the first one, because the first one's the only one that I actually have hooked up the output. Okay, here we go. So we can see it's got a value of 1, which is correct because we have a check mark. If I uncheck it and then run it again, we get a 0. and so on and so forth. So we can see that every single time we press it now, it's updating the value. And it's also updating the value of everything else in our GUI that's attached to the submit. Well, that gets updated with submit, the GUI submit command, because it applies for everything, even if it's not attached to that label. Like I could have none of these controls attached to that, attached to this label. Instead, I could have a button that says submit, and then when I press the submit button, then it updates everything. Oh, I don't want to redo this. Okay, assigning a variable. Okay, next we have checked gray, and check 3. Okay, checked. So let's say that I'm creating my GUI and I want it to start off with a state of being checked. So when I run it now, let me see. When I run it now, we have it's not checked. It's at our 0 state when we start it. But what if I want it to actually start in the check state? All I do is, once again, in the options, I just type in the word checked. And now when I run it again, it'll automatically start off with a value of 1. Okay, so that's checked. There's a third state. So we've talked about how we have two different states. We have a 0 if it's unchecked, and we have a 1 if it is checked. Now we're going to introduce a third state where it's called checked gray. And the checked gray, if we were to look at its value, has a value of -1. Now, I can't really give you a reason why you would want to use the checked gray, but let's say that I have a form of some sort. And I want to make sure that when the person's done with the form, that they've actually gone over all the controls. I want to make sure that they haven't missed a control. Because what could happen is they're going through it and they say, okay, I want this checked, I want this checked, I don't want this checked, I don't want this checked. And then they get to the end and they submit everything, whatever. Right? But what they accidentally did was one of those things that they said they didn't want to check. It was actually something that they didn't read. So what we might want is for it that they have to select either 0 or 1. So we can start off with a third state, the -1 value, and then they would have to actually go through it and change its value to either blank or checked. And the way we do that is we have two ways that we can do this. So we can have it that the third state is an option by just typing in check 3. And now I can cycle through. So we had unchecked, checked, and now we have checked gray. I know it's hard to see, but if I press that, it should have a -1. Okay? So right now we have it as an option, but what if I want it to actually start in that checked gray state? So the way we do that is the same way we do our checked. Except we add in gray. So it's checked gray, and now when it starts the next time, it'll start in this state. And if I hit number 2, I can see that it starts with a value of -1. Now what I can do is, let me see, I'm going to add in another checkbox. I'm going to do something really quick to demonstrate how we can use this to our advantage. Checkbox, and no, I'm going to use a button. Bear with me for a minute. So I'm going to create this label that's called do this. And I'm going to say, okay, so like I said, we're going to have it start off with this checked gray. And we want to make sure that the person actually goes through the whole form. And if they encounter this checked gray, they actually have to change it to either this state or this state. Because if it's in this state, we assume that they haven't actually done anything with that control. And we do want a definitive yes or no. So right now we don't have that definitive yes or no. So what we can do is that when they try to submit the finalized report, whatever, when they're done with it, and they try to submit everything, we can check to see if any of those values have a -1. So we're going to say if, I think it's checkbox 1. So if it equals -1, we'll have it say a message box saying you need to fill out all fields. And if they did change it, we'll have it say okay, let me make sure I have everything in here. Okay, so we have it. It's going to start off in the checked gray state, and we are going to run it. So now if I hit this button and they haven't checked this control, it's going to give us our message that says that they need to fill out all the fields. So it's still that checked gray. I hit this and it says you need to fill out all the fields. If I, let me see, okay, there we go. If I do check it, so I have a 0, that's fine, and it says all done. If I have a check mark, it's all done. Okay, so that's that part. I don't want to dwell on this too much. I think that's clear. If you have any questions, just leave a comment down below. Okay, this is our last thing, attaching. Okay, so I did end up stepping on my toes. I was supposed to do this, adding the label now. Oh well, there's still some things I can do. Okay, so you can also make it pressing. Okay, so one of the other things that I have included with this attaching it to the label was that we can actually make it do other things besides just this submit. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a brand new label. So I got a brand new label. And we're going to have it do something else besides just submitting the value. I actually wrote a program the other day, and I was thinking about, when I was writing this lesson, I was thinking something, a reason why I was going to show the other program for some reason. And when I came up this morning and I was trying to figure out why was I thinking of showing the other program, I couldn't figure it out. But now I remember, so I'll show you that in a second. Okay, so I have our checkbox, and I have it attached to a brand new label. Now, instead of our checkbox actually updating the value of that variable that we had, like instead of it updating the value of our variable here, we don't care about that this time. What we're actually going to get it to do is kind of behave like more like a button. So we can actually use our checkbox in ways that they're perhaps not intended. We can use it for anything we really want. So we can have it behave kind of like we would expect for a button. So we press a button and we expect for something to happen. Well, we can use the checkbox the exact same way. In fact, we can use any control the exact same way. And I'm going to get to that in a couple of tutorials where we can really start doing some cool things. Okay, so let's see. Once again, to keep things simple, I'm just going to use a message box because it's the fastest way for me to demonstrate something without taking too much time. So message box. And just remember, it could be anything. This message box, you can replace it with anything. You could have it run a program. You could have it shoot missiles out of your eyeballs. You could have it do anything you want. I just use message box because it's easiest for me to type it up in quick succession. And it's easy for you to see that something's actually happening. Like I can make it something that's happening in the background, but that you can't actually see it. A message box, it pops up. You can see that something happened. Okay? So now, when I save it and run it, instead of it, when I check the checkbox, instead of it updating the value for our variable, all it's going to do is go into this label and pop up our message box. And there we go. It did something. Okay? So that's it there. Now I do remember what I wanted. So the other day I was with some friends and we were playing cards and everything, and we wanted to play some dice, and we looked around, we couldn't find any dice, so I created a dice game. The game's not important, but the same way that I had this pop up a message box by clicking on it, this time if I click on one of these, what it's going to do is actually replace the image that's shown here. So right now you have a red 3 or a red die with the 3 on it. If I hit this, it's actually going to change it. Right? So I don't have to just use a checkbox just to update a value of a 0 or 1. I can actually have it do other things besides just that. Right? Likewise, I can, just like with the other controls, I can make them disappear. So if I hit this button here, it's going to make those controls disappear. Okay? So like I said, that's some of the kinds of things you can do. I can't believe I didn't have anything else. There were some things that I didn't add into this. Okay, I'll go over one more quick thing. I know this tutorial's gone a lot longer. I'll probably review this. If I'm not happy with it, I'll redo it. But I meant to do this tutorial yesterday, and I just sat on it, and I sat on it all day today. And I just feel like if I don't get it over with, even if I'm not totally happy with the quality of it, I'm not going to get it done until like next month. So if I can live with it, I'm just going to live with it. Just bear with it. I'm rusty at these. Okay, so let's say that we wanted our control to be hidden in the beginning. So hide, and then I need this control. So what I'm going to type in is GUI control, comma, hide, comma, and then the next parameter is the variable that's associated with our control. So in this case, the variable that's associated with it is the checkbox 1 variable. And when we run it now, as soon as it runs it, it's going to hide our checkbox so we can't see it. And then what we're going to do is we're going to make it so that way when we press the button, it'll make it reappear. Now, is it show? I think it's show. Let me see. I'm going to get rid of this. We don't need this anymore. Okay, so when we hit the button, we're going to have it do GUI control, and then I think it's show. I'm not positive. Show, and then we need our control, which is our checkbox 1. Okay, so now when we run it, our checkbox is going to be hidden, and then if we hit the button, it should make it show. Okay, likewise, we can have it start off with a disabled state, and then when we hit our button, we'll enable it. So you notice how the text right now is this red. Watch what happens when because it's going to be in its disabled state, and you're going to be able to tell that it's in a disabled state by the text. So you see it's all grayed out. We can't interact with it, but then if I hit the button, it goes back to being interactable. Okay, I think that's it for this tutorial. I will see you on the next one. I haven't really decided which I'm going to do next, but there's a tutorial that I'm really been itching to do, but I have a few others that I have to cover first just to make sure we're in sequence. So I'll see you on the next one. I don't know what it is yet. You'll know when I post it. Have a good day, and I guess, yeah, I'll see you on the next one.